In the twilight skies of Etherian, a planet draped in silver light and endless clouds, the stars looked like frozen tears. The world had once been beautiful, alive with music, laughter, and the scent of crystal gardens that shimmered beneath two moons. But that was before the Great Silence, before the wars that left cities hollow and hearts colder than the northern wind. Among the ruins stood Princess Lyra, the last living heir of Etherian's royal bloodline. She was only 20 in human years, yet her eyes held centuries of sorrow. The weight of her people's extinction pressed on her slender shoulders, and every dawn she woke to the echo of voices that no longer existed. Her world had turned to whispers. Lyra lived inside the Echo Palace, a massive dome of glass and pale stone that reflected the light of stars. She no longer wore her crown, only a thin ribbon of silver around her wrist, the last gift of her mother. Her palace was guarded by machines now, silent drones that obeyed but never spoke. Loneliness had become her only companion, but something changed the day she saw a falling flame streak across Etherian's atmosphere. The sky rippled with color, and for a brief, impossible moment she felt warmth. Not the artificial warmth of technology, but something alive, something human. The flame crashed in the northern dunes. Lyra stood at her balcony, her heart pounding like it hadn't in years. Her advisors, though still loyal through holographic links, warned her to stay away. It could be another weapon, another trick, they said. But her instincts whispered otherwise. And Lyra, who had once been afraid of nothing, followed the flame. The journey took her through the crimson wastes, where glass sand shimmered and reflected her face like broken mirrors. The air burned with static energy, and the sky pulsed with distant thunder. She walked alone, guided only by the strange pull in her chest. When she reached the crash site, smoke curled around a crater. Inside it lay a figure, scarred metal around a soft body, blood mingling with dust. A human. He was breathing, barely. His name, as she later learned, was Elias Carter, a young explorer from Earth who had strayed too close to an unstable wormhole. He had not expected to survive. Lyra knelt beside him, her trembling fingers brushing soot from his face. His skin was warm, alive. Something inside her chest ached, a forgotten part of her heart awakening like a song remembered after centuries. When his eyes opened, the world shifted. They were brown, earthy, kind, full of disbelief as they met hers. "An angel?" he whispered hoarsely. Lyra almost smiled. No one had ever called her that. Not since her world fell. "I'm no angel," she said softly. "You've landed on Etherian." He frowned faintly, trying to rise. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have," she murmured, helping him to his feet. "No one remembers us anymore." Over the next few hours, she brought him to the Echo Palace. The empty halls seemed less hollow with his footsteps beside hers. Elias asked questions about the sky, the ruins, her people. And though her answers were tinged with sorrow, she found comfort in his curiosity. He looked at her world not as a grave, but as something still alive. That night, as he slept near the ancient hearth, Lyra watched the flames reflect in his face. She didn't know why, but the sight made her chest ache in a way that was both painful and beautiful. For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer to whoever still listened among the stars. "Let this light stay," she said. "Just a little longer." And somewhere deep within her, something fragile began to heal. When dawn came to Etherian, it painted the shattered palace walls in soft gold. Lyra stood at the balcony, watching the twin suns rise, their rays bending through the fractured domes. For the first time in years, the light did not feel cruel. It felt like a promise. Below her, Elias stirred from his sleep. His movements were careful, his breath shallow, but his eyes still carried that spark of wonder from the night before. He sat up, taking in the palace's vast halls, their silent beauty echoing stories long forgotten. "Where is everyone?" he asked. Lyra turned, her expression unreadable. "Gone," she said simply. "My people fought for peace, and peace buried them." Elias fell silent. His world, Earth, had its scars too, but the emptiness here was deeper, an echo that reached into his chest. "You've been alone all this time?" "Yes," Lyra replied softly. "Alone with memory." He looked at her then, truly looked, and realized how delicate her loneliness was. Her voice carried the tone of 1,000 unshed tears. Her movements were graceful yet guarded, as though every step risked awakening ghosts. They walked the halls together that morning, Elias examined the murals on the walls, paintings of shining towers, starships, and beings with wings of light. You were advanced, he said in awe. We were proud, Lyra corrected. Pride turned to division, division to war. Elias stopped before a cracked statue, an image of Lyra herself carved when she was still a child. You were happy once, he said quietly. Lyra's gaze softened. I was a human once too. The words made him pause. There was something in her tone, an ache, a yearning to belong to something simple, something kind. Maybe you still are, he murmured. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a ruler, not as a symbol, but as her. Just Lyra. Later that day, she showed him the observatory of stars, the only place in the palace that still functioned. The dome above them opened, revealing the endless night beyond the clouds. Constellations shimmered in cold beauty. Lyra reached out, her hand hovering over the projection table. That's where your world lies, she said, pointing to a faint blue light. Elias leaned close. It's so far. Distance doesn't mean separation, she said quietly. It's silence that breaks us. He looked at her, sensing that she wasn't talking about planets anymore. The air between them grew soft, fragile. For a long moment, neither spoke. The stars filled the silence like breath between heartbeats. Then suddenly, the observatory lights flickered. The old systems groaned awake, and an ancient hologram shimmered before them, an image of Lyra's father, the late king of Etherian. His voice was faint, broken by static. To my daughter, if you see this, then Etherian has fallen. You must endure, Lyra. Find what remains. Protect it. Lyra's composure cracked. She turned away, clutching her ribboned wrist, her voice trembling. He recorded this before the silence began. I thought the message was lost. Elias hesitated before stepping forward. Slowly, carefully, he placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it anchored her. She looked at his hand, then at his face, and saw no pity, only understanding. Your father believed in you, he said gently. Maybe he knew someone would find you. Maybe that's why I'm here. Lyra wanted to answer, but the words stuck in her throat. Her heart beat faster than it had in years. That night, as the wind howled outside the palace, Elias sat near the old hearth again. Lyra stood in the doorway, the faint firelight tracing her silhouette. Elias, she said softly, why did you come so far from your world? He looked up at her, his voice calm but tired. I was searching for something worth finding. Lyra's eyes glimmered like glass. And did you find it? He smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Outside, lightning rippled across the sky. But inside the palace, for the first time in years, the air was warm. Two souls, one human, one broken, had found a spark in the ruins, and Etherian, silent for decades, began to whisper again. The days that followed felt unreal to Lyra. For years, time had been a weight, a slow, unbearable march through silence. But now every sunrise seemed to breathe again. Elias was still weak from his crash, but he worked tirelessly, exploring the ruins and repairing fragments of technology that Lyra had long abandoned as hopeless. One morning, she found him kneeling beside a broken energy conduit, sparks dancing at his fingertips. You shouldn't be up, she scolded gently. He grinned, brushing soot from his cheek. You sound like my old commander. I fix things, it's what I do. Lyra tilted her head, curious. On your world, do all warriors mend what they break? Elias paused. Not all, he admitted quietly. But I try to. The words lingered between them, quiet yet powerful. She had seen countless conquerors, cold, unfeeling machines of pride. But Elias, he carried scars not from cruelty, but from trying too hard to care. In the evenings, they often spoke near the ancient fire pit in the courtyard. The wind sang through shattered arches, carrying with it the scent of metal and rain. Lyra would ask him about Earth, its seas, its skies, its people. Elias painted it in colors she'd almost forgotten existed. There's noise everywhere, he said one night, smiling wistfully. Music in the streets, laughter from people you'll never meet twice. It's messy, chaotic, but alive. Lyra closed her eyes. Your world sounds like a heartbeat. He glanced at her. And yours? She hesitated, her voice turning soft. Mine forgot how to beat. For a long moment, only the wind spoke. Elias wanted to say something, anything, but he realized that sometimes silence was the gentlest kind of answer. Later, As they explored the palace's deeper halls, they reached the Hall of Memory, a chamber filled with crystalline obelisks that glowed faintly when touched. Lyra brushed her fingers over one and a shimmering image appeared, children laughing, running through golden gardens. Her voice broke as she whispered, "They were my friends, my world." Elias stood beside her, his hand close but not touching. He didn't intrude on her grief. He simply stood with her. When the image faded, she turned toward him. Her silver eyes reflected sorrow and gratitude. "Why do you stay, Elias? You could have left when your ship was repaired." He smiled faintly. "Because maybe fixing you is more important." Lyra blinked, startled. "I'm not broken." "No," he said gently, his tone steady and kind. "But you've been hurting for so long you forgot what it's like to be whole." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to deny it, but deep down his words struck truth like sunlight through frost. That night Lyra couldn't sleep. The stars outside her chamber window looked closer somehow. She thought of Elias's laughter echoing down the halls, the warmth of his hand guiding her through darkness, the way he looked at her, not as a princess, not as a legend, but as someone who mattered. For years, she had tried to protect what was left of her world, but she'd never realized that something still existed to protect within herself. Hope, and perhaps something deeper. Something she did not dare name yet. The next morning, she found Elias standing on the balcony, staring at the horizon where the desert met the sky. "Lyra," he said softly, "your world isn't dead. It's waiting. You said the air here hums with silence, but I think it's trying to sing again." She stepped beside him. The light painted his face in gold, and for a heartbeat he looked like something born from her own lost dreams. "I used to believe," she whispered, "that I was cursed to remember. But now I think maybe I was meant to wait." Elias turned to her, his eyes steady. "Then let's wait together." Lyra felt her heart flutter, an unfamiliar trembling rhythm that made her feel alive and fragile all at once. The suns rose higher, their light spilling through the ruins. For the first time in an eternity, Lyra smiled without sorrow shadowing it. And far above them, among the silent stars, Etherian began to hum again softly, like a world learning how to breathe. The winds of Etherian shifted. For the first time in decades, storms gathered not from chaos but from awakening. The planet was stirring, its sleeping heart echoing the steps of two beings who had rekindled light where there was only ash. Lyra stood before the observatory window, her eyes reflecting lightning beyond the glass. The skies had begun to rage again, a strange phenomenon on a planet that had long forgotten weather. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. The world was responding to her emotions, and lately her emotions were anything but still. Elias had become a constant in her days, a presence both grounding and bewildering. She found herself listening for his footsteps, waiting for his laughter, wondering if he'd smile when he saw her. The ache inside her was no longer one of grief but of longing, quiet and deep. But peace rarely lasted in a world built on memory. That afternoon, the palace alarms blared, a sound that Lyra hadn't heard in years. Red lights pulsed along the corridor walls. Elias ran to her side, his pulse racing. "What's happening?" Lyra's face paled. "An intrusion. Something has entered orbit." Together, they rushed to the observatory. The old scanners flickered to life, revealing a dark silhouette cutting through the upper atmosphere. Sleek, angular, unmistakably alien. Lyra's voice trembled. "That's Etherian technology," Elias frowned. "I thought your people were gone." "They are," she whispered. "But their machines were not." The screen showed the symbol of the Regency, the faction responsible for the Great Silence, the ones who had turned her world into ruin. Her throat tightened. "They were the last soldiers of my father's council. They blamed me for his death. If they survived," she turned toward Elias, her voice sharp, "they'll destroy what's left, including you." He met her gaze steadily. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Elias, "No," he said, firm but calm. "I didn't come this far to watch you fight alone." Something inside Lyra cracked at those words. For so long no one had stood beside her, not even when she begged the stars for help. Now a human from a forgotten corner of the cosmos had made her feel protected. They spent the night preparing. Elias examined what little weaponry still functioned. while Lyra reactivated the palace's ancient shields, systems she thought she'd never need again. The storm outside intensified, lightning striking in violent bursts across the horizon. Elias found her later in the Hall of Memory, staring at the glowing obelisks. "You're afraid," he said softly. She didn't deny it. "I've lived in fear of losing what I have left. But now," she looked at him, eyes shimmering, "now I fear losing what I've found." Elias took a step closer. "Then we hold on to it together," her breath caught. For a moment the storm seemed to pause, as if the planet itself listened. When the enemy ships descended, fire rained across the deserts of Etherion. The ground trembled. The Echo Palace shook, shards of glass falling from the high domes. Lyra stood at the command deck, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Activate defense grid." Elias manned the lower systems, rerouting power through damaged conduits. Sparks flew, heat flooding the room, but he didn't stop. Outside, the palace's ancient cannons roared to life for the first time in decades. Blinding beams of blue fire sliced through the sky. Lyra's eyes burned with determination. "This was once my father's kingdom. I won't let it die again." Her voice was regal and raw all at once, a queen reclaiming the strength she thought she'd lost. Elias looked at her with awe, not as a princess of ruins, but as a warrior born from grief and courage. By nightfall, the skies were still again. The ships had retreated, their systems crippled by the storm that had risen to defend her. The planet itself seemed to have fought beside them. When silence returned, Lyra walked to the balcony, the wind cool against her skin. Elias stood behind her, exhausted, his face streaked with soot. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But next time, we'll be ready." She turned to him then, her eyes soft yet certain. "You fought for a world that isn't yours." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it is now." Lyra felt warmth rise in her chest, gentle, terrifying, and beautiful. "Elias," she whispered, "you make me believe that even a broken world can still love." And beneath them, Etherion glowed faintly, its dormant cities flickering with the first traces of light in centuries. The planet was healing. So was she. For the first time since the Great Silence, Etherion's skies shimmered not with ash but with hope. Faint lights flickered across the dead horizon, like embers remembering how to glow. The Echo Palace, once a tomb of grief, now pulsed with new energy, restored piece by piece through Elias's hands and Lyra's courage. Days passed quietly, but the stillness was no longer hollow. It was peace, the kind that felt fragile, precious. Lyra stood by the old balcony, the wind dancing through her hair. She gazed toward the distant dunes where smoke from the battle had faded. "It's strange," she murmured. "I thought victory would feel triumphant, but it only feels heavy." Elias, who was repairing a damaged drone nearby, looked up. "Because victory isn't the end," he said gently. "It's what comes after that really matters." She smiled faintly. "And what comes after?" He shrugged, wiping grease from his palms. "Living, healing, maybe even laughing again." The words sounded so simple, yet they struck her deeper than any philosophy she had ever known. That evening, they shared a small meal together, the first she'd ever eaten with another being since her people vanished. The food was meager, rehydrated rations from Elias's ship, but to Lyra, it tasted like warmth. Elias talked about his life on Earth, his sister who ran a bookstore by the sea, his dream to explore the stars and the quiet loneliness that followed him between worlds. Lyra listened, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the fire. "You left behind everything," she said softly. "Didn't you fear never returning?" He hesitated. "I did, but I think I was already lost before I came here." Lyra tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled, a small, tired smile that carried more truth than words ever could. "Now I think I'm found." For a moment, silence filled the air, not empty but tender. Their gazes met, and the distance between their worlds seemed to vanish. The next morning, Lyra led Elias to a place she had never shown anyone, the Crystal Garden, hidden deep within the palace. The ceiling above was shattered, letting beams of light pour in through the cracks. The flowers were strange, half living, half mineral, their petals shimmering like glass. "They survived the war," she said softly, kneeling beside them. These flowers feed on light. When the skies dimmed, they went to sleep. But now, Elias watched as she brushed her fingers along the blossoms. They began to glow, soft blues and golds rippling outward like a breath. "You brought them back," he murmured. "No," she said, glancing at him. "We did." He crouched beside her, his reflection mingling with hers in the crystal petals. "Lyra, you're incredible." She looked away, a faint color touching her pale cheeks. "I was once called powerful. But this, what we've done, it isn't power. It's something I don't have a word for." Elias smiled gently. "Maybe it's love." The word hung in the air. Delicate, dangerous, alive. Lyra froze, her eyes wide. No one had spoken that word to her since before the wars. For a heartbeat, she felt her chest tighten, her pulse racing like the wind through the towers. She whispered, almost to herself, "Love doesn't survive here." Elias shook his head. "It survives anywhere it's given a chance." That night, neither of them spoke much. The air between them was full of things they didn't yet know how to say. Lyra sat by the window, tracing the constellations Elias had taught her to name. He watched her in silence, memorizing the curve of her smile against the starlight. When she finally turned to him, her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Elias, if you ever return to your world, will you remember me?" He met her gaze, steady and warm. "Lyra, you've already become the reason I want to return. So I can tell my world that even in the farthest dark, there was someone who made it beautiful again." Her eyes glistened, and she looked away quickly, afraid that if she held his gaze any longer, her heart would betray everything she'd tried to protect. Outside, the twin moons of Etherian aligned, a rare sight casting silver light over the palace. Lyra lifted her head toward them, whispering, "Then promise me, Elias, no matter where you go, keep your light." He smiled softly. "Only if you promise to keep yours." And for the first time in the history of a broken planet, two beings from different worlds made a vow not written in law or blood, but in hope. Above them, Etherian's moons shimmered like witnesses, and deep within its heart something sacred awakened again. The days that followed were calm, too calm. The sky above Etherian glowed in faint shades of violet, and the air hummed with a strange, restless quiet. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. Lyra and Elias spent their mornings repairing the remaining systems of the palace, their afternoons exploring forgotten chambers filled with relics of a civilization that once sang to the stars. Every corridor they uncovered told a story of love, loss, and legacy. But beneath it all, a whisper haunted Lyra's heart. The Regency would return. The last battle had only been a shadow of what was coming. She could feel it in the pulse of the ground, in the flicker of the palace lights, in the way the stars seemed to shimmer with warning. Still, she tried to hide her fear. Elias had given her laughter again, fragile, genuine, and bright, and she couldn't bring herself to drown that light with dread. That evening, they stood together in the stellar chamber, the highest point of the palace. The dome was clear, giving them an unbroken view of the universe beyond. Elias leaned against the railing, gazing at the stars. "When I was a kid," he said softly, "I used to dream about this, standing on another world, looking back at everything I left behind." Lyra looked at him, her silver eyes soft in the starlight. "And now that you're here?" He smiled faintly. "Now I realize. What I was looking for wasn't in the stars. It was in the people I'd meet among them." Her breath caught, the words sinking into the quiet spaces of her heart. "You mean me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias turned toward her, his eyes warm. "You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost, a reason to believe that even after everything breaks, something good can still be built." For a moment, Lyra didn't speak. The emotions swelling inside her were too vast for words. She wanted to reach out, to hold his hand, to tell him that he had become the light she had once begged the stars for. But before she could, the palace trembled. The alarms blared. Holographic warnings flickered across the walls. Lyra's heart lurched. "No," she whispered. "Not now." Elias grabbed his scanner. "They're back." "Worse," she breathed. "A full fleet." Through the glass dome, shadows darkened the sky, ships larger and more menacing than before. The air crackled with static, A voice echoed from the comm systems, cold and commanding. Princess Lyra of Etherian, you were warned. Surrender the palace or be erased with it. Elias clenched his fists. They won't stop. Lyra's expression hardened. Then neither will we. She moved quickly, activating the palace's defense cores, her fingers dancing across glowing panels. The energy grid flared to life, casting golden light through the corridors. Elias joined her, rerouting power to the lower generators. Outside, thunder rolled, not from weather but from the roar of engines and weapons charging. The first blast struck, shaking the ground. Lyra stumbled, but Elias caught her, steadying her with both hands. "Stay with me," he said urgently. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice trembling but her eyes burned with fire. And hours passed like minutes. They fought together, Lyra commanding with the grace of a queen, Elias working with the steady resolve of a soldier. Every explosion outside was answered by a pulse of energy from the palace's shields. But slowly, the defenses began to fail. The storm beyond the walls raged with fury, and the last layer of shielding flickered under the assault. Elias turned to her. "We need to evacuate." "There's nowhere to go," she said quietly. "If the palace falls, Etherian's heart will die with it. Everything we've restored, gone." He looked at her, desperation and devotion clashing in his eyes. "Then let me buy you time." "No." The word tore from her lips. "You won't die for me." "I'm not dying for you," he said softly. "I'm living for what you've given me." "That's different." Tears glimmered in her eyes as the lights flickered. "Elias, please." He stepped closer, close enough that the chaos around them blurred to silence. "You taught me that broken worlds can heal, Lyra. But someone has to protect the healer." Before she could protest, he reached out, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "If I don't make it, promise me you'll keep believing. Promise me you'll keep loving your world." Lyra's voice broke. "Only if you promise to come back." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess I have no choice." Final explosion ripped through the horizon. Etherian's sky turned white with light. The palace's shields collapsed, but in their last instant, something incredible happened. Lyra raised her hands and the crystals of the palace responded. Energy surged through her veins, her power igniting in brilliant waves. The ancient magic of Etherion, the bond between ruler and planet, awoke fully within her. Elias shielded his eyes as the chamber filled with radiance. Lyra's voice echoed through the storm, clear and fierce. "I am the daughter of Etherion. You will not take my world again." The shockwave that followed shattered the enemy fleet. The light consumed the sky, dissolving metal and fury into dust. When it finally faded, silence returned. Lyra collapsed to her knees, trembling. "Elias," she whispered, searching through the smoke. "Elias!" But he didn't answer. Only the sound of the wind remained. Silence, the kind that came after storms, the kind too deep, too vast, too heavy for words. The palace that once shimmered with defiance now stood in ruins again. Its spires bowed under the weight of smoke and memory. Lyra's knees sank into the cracked floor, her breath shallow. "Elias," she whispered again, her voice breaking against the emptiness. There was no answer, only the faint hum of the planet's energy fading around her. The battle was over. The enemy fleet had been erased, their ships turned to stardust by the power she had unleashed. But the cost. Oh, the cost. Her eyes burned as she crawled through the wreckage of the stellar chamber, shards of crystal cutting her palms. "Please," she breathed, searching the smoke. "Please be here." And then a faint sound. A cough, a breath, Lyra. Her head snapped toward it. There, half buried beneath fallen beams, lay Elias, bloodied, bruised, but alive. She rushed to him, her hands trembling as she cleared the debris. "Don't move," she said, her voice cracking. "You're hurt?" He smiled weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "You should see the other guys." A sob burst from her chest, half a laugh, half despair. She pressed her forehead against his, tears falling freely. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I would," he murmured, his breath shallow. "You kept me in your light." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, holding on to the fragile silence between heartbeats. Around them, the air shimmered faintly, the residual glow of the power she had unleashed. The planet was alive. She could feel its pulse again, slow but steady, like the rhythm of a sleeping giant. Elias stirred, looking toward the shattered dome above. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved them." Lyra followed his gaze. Through the cracks she could see the night sky, vast and endless, sprinkled with stars that burned brighter than she'd ever seen before. "No," she whispered. "We did." He tried to sit up, grimacing from the pain. "Guess I'll need a few repairs." She smiled through her tears. "You humans," she said gently, "you break so easily. Yet somehow you never stop standing back up. Maybe that's what makes us human," he said. "Or maybe it's what makes us like you." Days turned into weeks. The palace slowly healed just as its ruler did. The energy of Etherian, once dormant, now flowed again through its veins, restoring light to its long silent cities. The air was alive with whispers of wind and the faint hum of renewal. Elias recovered slowly, helped by the very power that Lyra had awakened. They rebuilt side by side, laughter and quiet conversation replacing the echoes of war. One evening, when the suns dipped low, Lyra brought him to the crystal garden once more. The blossoms glowed even brighter now, their colors rippling across the walls. Elias stared in wonder. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Lyra looked at him. Not the garden, not the palace, but him. "It's because Etherian remembers kindness," she said. "It listens to hearts. And yours. It never stopped believing." He reached out, brushing a glowing petal with his fingertips. "And what about yours?" She smiled softly, her eyes shimmering like starlight. "Mine finally learned how to beat again." Later that night, beneath the moons, they stood together at the balcony where it had all begun. The winds were calm, carrying the scent of crystal flowers and fresh rain. Elias turned toward her, his voice quiet. "What will you do now?" Lyra looked out at her world, the towers flickering with life, the horizon glowing with dawn. "Rebuild," she said. "Not the way it was, but the way it should be." He nodded. "And me?" She turned to him, her expression soft, radiant. "You've already done what no one else could. You reminded a lost world how to hope." Elias smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time Earth learned the same." Her breath caught. "You're leaving?" He hesitated, pain flickering in his eyes. "I have to. My ship's beacon reactivated during the storm. A rescue team will come." The words hit her like quiet thunder. She stepped closer. "And if they take you, will you remember Etherian?" His voice was steady, though his eyes shone. "Every time I see the stars." She wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, but she knew she couldn't chain someone who had given her freedom. Instead, she lifted her hand, resting it gently over his heart. "Then take a piece of Etherian with you." He covered her hand with his own. "Only if you keep a piece of me." The next morning, his ship rose toward the skies, trailing light through the dawn. Lyra watched from the balcony, the wind tangling through her hair. When the ship vanished beyond the clouds, she whispered, "Goodbye, Elias Carter." But somewhere deep within her heart, and in the heart of Etherian itself, a quiet voice answered, carried on the wind, "Goodbye, Lyra of Etherion. You were never broken." The twin suns rose over a world reborn, and high above, one small ship glided through the stars, its pilot smiling softly as he whispered to the empty sky. She wasn't just an alien princess. She was the proof that love can heal worlds.